Hey guys, I'm just Jershin and welcome back to PokeMarch Madness Season 3 featuring Rangoon and also Banjo's back. Can you see Banjo? Hold on. There you go. Banjo's sleeping on a little pile of blankets back there. It's the squad's all here today. It's a very special episode. If you haven't seen the past couple episodes, highly recommend you go check them out. It's been fun this season. Theme of Season 3, by the way, of course, characters. Thus far we have done Pokemon Rivals, Pokemon Champions, Pokemon Moms, Pokemon Evil Teams, and last time I believe, if memory serves correct, we did Pokemon Villains. Today we're going to go back to the other side of the coin, to the good guys, so to speak. Morality is a gray area in general, but you know, in terms of Pokemon games, the characters that are typically on the good side, this would be a nice twist if we had an evil one of these someday. Bada bing, bada boom. Pokemon Professors. We're going to be looking at the different professors from each region. Some region have multiple. Typically, the professor exists mostly to give you your starting Pokemon, but if we separate that from the character, because that's what connects most of these guys, and we try to be a little bit more objective, granted it's a little bit tougher with these guys, you don't really battle these characters. There's a couple professors you battle, which is always a nice little twist. But most of them, you know, exist in the starting town and they don't do much after that. But I've attempted in my brain to, as I've said this year, be a little bit more objective. I have attempted in my brain to compile some of the metrics, some objective metrics by which to grade these professors. Now, these are metrics kind of, but they're going to end up being subjective at the end of the day. And I think I've got it nailed down to 3 things that I would like to judge these professors on. Number 1, what is their area of expertise? Every Pokemon professor in each of the games has their quote-unquote field of study, something that they specialize in. Is it cool? Is it interesting? Is it lame as heck? We will talk about that. Secondly, just the general vibe of the characters. How is the personality? How do you stand out in the crowded group of different Pokemon professors? Are you interesting? That's number 2. That one's going to be a little subjective. And finally, number 3, are you important to the storyline in any way? Do you factor into the storyline of the region? Or do you literally just exist to give us our starter Pokemon? All 3 of these things will be percolating through my brain as I go through some of these ideas here. So, without further ado, should mention, I will be judging these characters not as characters, only as professors based off of the metrics that I've just laid out for you guys. Sorry, by the way, if I end up sneezing a ton. I don't think I'm allergic to animals, but every time I have Rangoon on my lap and I pet her a ton and I send her fur up into the air, my nose gets mega itchy. So apologies if you see a lot of scratching or sneezing. I will be judging these guys just as professors, purely as professors, based on the metrics that I aligned before. Number 2, and I probably should have mentioned this like in the very first episode, it didn't occur to me till just today. I don't really watch the Pokemon anime. My knowledge is certainly not the manga, and not really the anime either. I watched the anime when I was a kid. I think I binged the black and white anime early in college when I was feeling mega nostalgic and wanted to feel like a child again. But other than that, my knowledge of the anime is almost nothing. So I'm sure some of these characters are way more flushed out and have way more interesting roles in the Pokemon anime. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be factoring that in because I've never seen it. So we're going to go based purely on how they appear in the main series games. Oh, NSL and Yeetus will be doing their version of this video as well. If you would like to watch theirs, and you absolutely should, links will be in the description below. And I'll have the link to this bracket if you would like to fill it out yourself. Okay. Introduction's complete. Where's my water? It's gone. Introduction's complete. Let's get started. Professor Oak, of course, gets a bye, the OG. We'll talk about him later. And we'll get into our first matchup, which is going to be... Sorry, I hit my funny bone. Professor Sycamore versus Professor Birch. That was not me saying ooh-wee because Sycamore is a hot daddy. That is not why I was doing that, but maybe subconsciously. Professor Sycamore is the professor of the Kalos region. He's a cool French guy. He's got some very cool hair. I think he's got a nice personality. His area of expertise, of course, is Mega Evolution. Around Gen 6, and I hate to call Mega Evolution a gimmick because I think it's really cool. I really like Mega Evolution. I like it Mega Evolution because it was the first of the quote-unquote gimmicks, but really ever since Gen 6, Every generation has to include some sort of Mega Evolution, Z moves, Gigantamaxing, whatever it may be. They include some sort of gimmick to go along with the region, and from Gen 6 on, the professor basically is just like, I study that. That's what I study. There's a new gimmick in this region, and that's what I study, which makes sense. There's only so many things about Pokemon that you can study, so it makes sense that they got to introduce some new concepts. But as the first of these quote-unquote gimmicks, Mega Evolution is obviously awesome. I believe Sycamore in the lore studied underneath Professor Rowan briefly, because Professor Rowan researches Pokemon evolution just in general, and so Sycamore specialized for his region in Mega Evolution. He gives you a Cantonian starter in the beginning of the game, which is a kind of broken. I know a lot of people maybe don't like that, but you get a Cantonian starter that eventually gets to Mega Evolve, which is kind of sick. I will say this about Gen 6, and I think Gen 6 is kind of underrated. It's a little fricked up that they introduced Mega Evolution, and your main 3 starters don't get to Mega Evolve, but they give you an original Kanto starter that gets to Mega Evolve. A little fricked up. Overall, I think Sycamore's pretty cool. Obviously, Mega Evolution is like, other than Lysander and Team Flare attempting to end the world, Mega Evolution is like what separates the Kalos region, and it's very embedded into the plot line. So, he's pretty important. His studies are pretty well embedded into the storyline. I respect him for that. Pokemon Birch is a little bit of a weirdo. You meet him being chased by a Poochyena right outside of Little Root Town, which kind of instantly, on the coolness scale, I hate to say it, it's going to lower you a couple of docks. The chin beard is also going to lower you another 30 docks. I tried to rock the chin beard when I first went to college. It was a regret. It is one that I will never do again in my entire life. I used to just shave off the mustache, leave the little strap underneath like a bicycle helmet. Not a great look, in my personal opinion. I don't know that Birch really can rock it either. Not to judge appearances, let's talk about his field of expertise, which, this is weird, again. So most Pokemon games, they introduce something new and they're like, this is the thing I study. So you would think that in Gen 3, which introduced Pokemon abilities, that maybe Professor Birch's field of study would be Pokemon abilities, which would be kind of cool. It was a new mechanic in the region, and it would make sense. Nope, he studies habitats. Professor Birch studies where Pokemon hang out, which in the grand scheme of things, especially compared to some of the other cool professors in their fields of study, I gotta say, makes him a little bit of a lame-o. So I'm gonna give this one to Sycamore. I think Birch might be the weakest of all of the Pokemon professors. Okay. Next we have Magnolia and Elm. Magnolia, like Sycamore, like I said earlier, she studies the cool gimmick of the Galar region, which is Dynamaxing. She studies all about the Dynamaxing phenomenon. Now, she basically shows up early in the game. She doesn't even give you your starter Pokemon. Is she the first professor that doesn't give you a starter Pokemon? Because Leon gives you the starter Pokemon instead. I'm pretty sure she may be the first, unless I'm forgetting. I think she's the first mainline professor to not give you a starter Pokemon. I'll try not to hold that against you. She doesn't do a whole lot. She studies Dynamaxing. You get a wishing piece. And basically from the second that you leave her laboratory, you just never talk to her again. And in fact, it's Sonia, her understudy, who you end up interacting way more with, and we will get to Sonia a little bit later, but she ends up taking the mantle of Pokemon Professor. So I think Magnolia, she exists as a stepping stone for Sonia's character development. She's not a great Pokemon Professor, all things considered. Dynamaxing, very important, obviously, for Galar, but personality-wise, not that exciting. Embedded into the story, yes. Field of expertise, interesting, it's fine. Professor Elm. I don't know, I think it's nostalgia just because I love Johto. He's really kind of lame. Like, he's just a clumsy, nerdy, needs to get shoved in a locker kind of professor. His field of expertise is Pokemon breeding, which again was new in Gen 2, so there was his contribution. Ended up being extremely important in the grand scheme of things, not to Gen 2, but into, like, you know, the world of Pokemon in general. And personality-wise, I'm not gonna lie, he's kind of lame. Magnolia doesn't do a whole lot for me, so I'm going to give this one to Elm, maybe purely on nostalgia. Kukui gets a bye, congratulations. Rowan gets a bye, well deserved. Next we have Professor Laventon from the new Pokemon Legends Arceus, and we have Professor Burnette. Now, Professor Burnette, not the main professor of the Alola region, that goes to Professor Kukui. Professor Burnette, can we talk about a power couple? Holy Birch, hashtag goals. Professor Burnette is married to Professor Kukui. She studies the Ultra Wormholes and Pokemon from other dimensions, which is like about as entrenched into the Pokemon Sun and Moon storyline as you can get. Arguably maybe even more important to the Pokemon Sun and Moon storyline than Professor Kukui, who studies Pokemon moves. I know Z moves were important in the Alola region, but the Ultra Wormhole and Pokemon from different dimensions, the Ultra Beast, etc., is really what drives the plot line of Sun and Moon further. So she actually may be more important to the plot. Personality-wise, character design, oh baby, so good. And a very interesting field of study. Professor Laventon. Look, I love Pokemon Legends Arceus. I think it's one of the best Pokemon games ever made. It was a great update to the Pokemon formula, much needed. After 20 years of kind of rehashing the same thing over and over. I hate whenever this man's on the screen. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the weird beanie with the puffball at the top. I don't really understand what he does. He doesn't contribute a whole lot to the storyline. His field of expertise is Pokemon ecology, which is a science word that I don't really care about, to be honest with you. And he basically just exists to create this Pokedex that forces you to go out and catch like 60 of the same Pokemon over and over and over again. He just doesn't do it for me. I don't really get what his shtick is. It's cool that he saves you from the beach at the beginning of the game, but other than that, I don't care too much. I'm gonna give it to Professor Burnette here. Next we have Professor Juniper and Professor Samson Oak from Pokemon Sun and Moon, who is Professor Oak's brother? Cousin? Can't remember. There's some familial relation there. It's Professor Oak with a mullet and a Hawaiian shirt. Obviously, he is in Sun and Moon. He studies regional variants of Pokemon, which, you know, in the Alola region, dude, there's a lot of Alola professors, I just realized. They introduced a lot of stuff. Obviously, the Sun and Moon games were the first ones to... Gen 7 was the first to introduce regional variants. You had Alolan forms of a lot of the Cantonian Pokemon. So, of course, they gave a connection to Kanto in the form of an oak, and he studies those different forms. It's cool. He's really a side character in the grand scheme of things. He pops up here and there. He's got some... the fact that he's got the word oak attached to his name gives him some bravado. He's kind of just stealing this, not the spotlight, but he's riding the coattails a little bit of Professor Oak. I'm not saying that his studies have not earned it. I just think that you see the name Oak and you go, whoa, Professor Oak grew out a mullet. Oh, it's a different guy. Professor Juniper, on the other hand, first female professor, we stand a woman of science. She studies Pokemon origins, which is very important to... It's a little interesting because technically Gen 4 might be a little bit more origin themed if you want to consider like Arceus is the god of Pokemon and he was introduced in Gen 4 Space and Time, the creation of the universe. That's kind of more origin based, so it's kind of interesting that she studies this in Gen 5, but it's still a very important portion of Gen 5 as well. If I have a knock for Professor Juniper, love the design, like what she studies. She's very much one of those professors that gives you the Pokemon in the beginning of the game, and then is like, all right, off on your adventure. You don't really interact with her a lot over the course of the storyline, so that's kind of sad. But she's going to beat out Professor Samson Oak here, and Sonia gets a bye. All right, fantastic. We're already down to 8. That's pretty quick. We'll go back up to the top left. We have Professor Oak versus Professor Sycamore. Look, I attempt not to be clouded by judgment too much. It's gonna go to Professor Oak here. Professor Oak is the OG. He's the big mamma jamma. He's probably, if we're doing this like a real bracket, he's probably the 1 seed. He comes in a very strong position. My man shows up in just about every other Pokemon game. He's got connections, you know, in football, you talk about like a coaching tree. Professor Oak is like the big mamma jamma of all of this. Rowan studied under him. Sycamore studied under Rowan. Elm is obsessed with Professor Oak. Basically wants to be the guy. Oak is kind of like, he's very much the head honcho of all things Pokemon. Now I will say his field of expertise is about as generic as it gets. He was Gen 1. Things in Gen 1 were very generic. He studies Pokemon and their relationships with humans. Very basic. Not that many. The stakes were much lower in the Kanto region and in Gen 1 in general. There weren't any evil teams attempting to, you know, create a weapon to destroy all life on planet Earth. Rather, people were just Team Rocket was a thing, but for the most part, people were just living their lives, catching Pokemon and having a good time. And so he studied the relationships between Pokemon and people, which is like, it's at the core of just about, if you want to boil down Pokemon to a single thing, that's it. So it's very important, though maybe not as high stakes as some of the other ones, and definitely not as specialized. It's pretty broad, but he's the OG. He's going to get some points for that. Sycamore, cool looking guy. You know, maybe, I would say design-wise, as far as character design goes, maybe even cooler. You can't go against the OGs, though. Elm versus Kukui. We are not going to let nostalgia cloud our judgment here, because it would be criminal. Excuse me? It would be criminal to pretend that Professor Elm is cooler than Professor Kukui. Professor Kukui was like a much-needed shaking up of the Pokemon Professor formula. In most of these games, as you will see, the Professor is just an old science dude, or girl in Juniper's case. But for the most part, it's just an old science dude. Your very stereotypical interpretation of a scientist. And Kukui just has so much more personality. Like, obviously he's got his area of expertise. He wants to learn about Pokemon moves, what moves the most effective. Z moves get lumped into there as well. He's got his area of expertise, but he also has like his own ambitions and personality on the side of his work as well. He's a secret wrestler. Now, granted, the battle royales are very stupid. Every generation introduces some new battle style that's absolute garbage. Gen 6 had sky battles, make me want to throw up. Gen 5 had rotation and triple battles, get him out of here forever. Every generation introduces something like that, but at least he's got a cool luchador wrestling persona. And who can forget, backstory-wise, he started in Kanto. He challenged the Indigo Plateau. I can't remember if he beat Lance as the champion or not. Regardless, he was so inspired by what they were doing there, he came to the Alola region and started his own Pokemon League there. This man has ambitions beyond just his duties as a professor, and that helps to really round out his character pretty significantly, in my opinion. Now we have Professor Rowan versus Professor Burnette. We talked about Professor Burnette. We have not talked about Rowan yet. Rowan, obviously, Diamond Platinum. He studies Pokemon evolution, as I talked about with Sycamore. Evolution is actually pretty important to the Gen 4 storyline in general. Gen 4, I think, unless I'm missing something from, I mean, you've got like Clamperl in Gen 3, but for the most part, Gen 4 went back and added a lot of evolutions to previous Pokemon, and they also added a lot of branched evolutions, or maybe Pokemon that evolved one way now had alternate ways to evolve. Gardevoir and Gallade come to mind, Frostlass and Glalie. There were a lot of things done in Gen 4 with evolution in general. Again, it's kind of strange. You would think Origins, Professor Juniper's field of study, would be more important and more connected to the Gen 4 storyline, but they saved it for Gen 5, which is fine. I think evolutions, I mean, it's probably the coolest aspect of Pokemon, and he studies not just Pokemon evolving, you know, Totodile into Crocodile into Feraligatr, but like the entire history of the evolution of Pokemon and how Pokemon came to be to this day. A very Charles Darwin-esque of Rowan, which I think is very solid. I love the design. I mean, it's just Oak with a mustache, if we want to be honest. Maybe the brown suit coat is doing a little bit for me as well, but I think his design, it's again pretty stereotypical, but it's about as like quintessential professor as you get. I actually like both of these quite a bit. Burnette suffers a little bit because she's a side professor. Again, crazy power couple, Kukui and Burnette. I'm gonna give it to Rowan here because I think he's a little bit more important to the plot line in his game in general. He does help you take down Team Plasma. Now, his field of expertise may not play into the taking down of Team Plasma, but I'm going to give it to him there. He's more involved, it feels like, in the goings-on of the Sinnoh region, and I like that. It helps flush out his character a little bit. Speaking of well-flushed-out characters, okay, Juniper's great. I love Juniper. We stand 2 women of science, but I'm going to have to give it to Sonia here. We literally get to see Sonia's transformation throughout the entire game, from assistant to Professor Magnolia to donning the mantle. I think you don't get to see that until post-game, but when she walks into the woods with the professor's coat, your boy's heart melted just a little bit. It's so well-deserved and adorable. Now, she doesn't pick up the mantle from Professor Nolia and continue studying Dynamaxing. She studies the history of the Galar region, which is, it's very narrow, I guess you could say, in terms of its importance to the overall world of Pokemon science. It's very narrow. It's just the Galar region. However, it's very on brand for her character. You basically get to go on your adventure. I want to replay through Sword and Shield, man. Good games. You basically go out throughout your adventure, meeting with Sonia all the time as she explains to you about the history of whether it's a weird crop, what do you call those things? Crop engraving on the side of a mountain, to a weird mural hidden behind a rock wall, to a museum with a statue depicting a hero, to some stained glass. She knows it all. She is truly an encyclopedia of the history of Galar. And the transformation from just a side character that joins you along the journey to getting to see her sport the professor coat by the end of the game is a good one. Plus, she cute. Okay, Professor Oak versus Professor Kukui. Down to the final 4 here, so we've already talked about most of them. I'm gonna go mostly based on gut here. And what's the closest thing to a gut? Your abdominal muscles. We're gonna give it to the 6-pack here. Not because I'm a simp, but for the reasons I said before. I think Kukui is a much needed... He's very refreshing in terms of what it means to be a Pokemon professor. I love the ambitions outside of just being a professor. He feels like a unique character in and of himself. He doesn't exist just to be the Pokemon professor. He is his own character, and he also happens to be the professor. And I think he succeeds in both of those very well, even if his field of study, little lame. Next we have Rowan and Sonia. This one's hard. This one's hard. I do love Sonia. I do love Sonia, but when you say the words Pokemon Professor, for some reason Rowan is like the first thing that comes to mind, and I have no idea why. Perhaps it's the gruff exterior, the mustache, the crazy sideburns, the brown trench coat. I don't know what it is about it, but when you say Pokemon Professor, this is the man whose face comes to mind. However, just because he is the first one I think of when you say Pokemon Professor, does that mean he is the best? Our champion round is Professor Kukui versus Professor Rowan. Essentially like your standard stereotypical professor versus a dude who breaks all the rules, all of the conventional norms, and not just because he's shredded. I'm giving it to Kukui. I'm gonna give it to Kukui. I don't like Sun and Moon that much. Probably some of maybe my second least favorite games next to Gen 3 and over the course of the entire thing. But I think if Sun and Moon has some redeeming qualities, it's the characters. And Kukui is one of my favorite characters that they've introduced in just about any of the games ever. And I think in terms of a Pokemon Professor, my man absolutely nails it. So I'm going to give it to him for the best Pokemon Professor of any of the games. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Please let me know in the comments down below, or fill out the bracket for yourself. You can then share it with me over on Twitter at JustJershin, or in the community Discord, which I think will be linked in the description below, I believe. NSL and Yeetus will be doing this bracket as well, so go support them. And yeah, we got a couple more. I think we got 4 or 5 more brackets. So we are past the midway point of season 3 of of PokeMarch Madness Season 3. It is absolutely flying by. I hope you're enjoying it. We got a couple more to go, though. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy, please consider showing some support down below. Liking, commenting, subscribing, all help out a tremendous deal. Share with your grandmother as always. But that, thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you guys next time.